Are you wondering about the true facts and dangers of lead paint and what to do when you're buying your first home? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Lead paint is a hazardous item that was used all over the United States, and it was banned in 1978 because when lead is ingested, it's toxic. When it's ingested by children under the age of 6, their bodies are so little and developing that it's really, really tough on a little one. What happened was a lot of homes and public housing projects that were built were painted. And as the paint aged and the kids were playing in the dirt near the house or inside the house, the paint would be peeling, say, on a windowsill, and the kids would touch the soil or the windowsill. And being kids as they are, they would put their hands in their mouth and they would eat the lead. And this isn't good because lead is toxic. Additionally, when someone was getting ready to repaint, they typically would sand the surface so the new paint would attach to the old. And when the process of sanding happened, lead dust would form and create a situation whereby lead becomes airborne and is breathed in through our mouths and our nasal cavities. Scientists have found that high levels of lead can cause brain damage. So, this is very, very serious and nothing to be dismissed. But back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, many of the home products that we used are now determined to have toxic effects on humans, and lead is one of them. Lead wasn't only in paint, it was also in ceramic, pictures, crystal, and kids' toys. And once the connection was made between lead and the toxicity to humans, that substance was banned in the specific product where it was used. Now, just for a moment here, I want to talk about how this will be brought up in your first time homebuyer journey. And having been in the field for almost 40 years, I would say the response that you will get from 99.9% of people is, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the lead paint form. I know all about that. Don't worry about that." Or, "Yeah, well, if you want to buy the house, we're telling you about it. It's this time frame of when lead paint was legal. And it's handled very nonchalantly." The other thing is, just because it's disclosed to you and the disclosure is given to you and it highlights children under the age of 6, it doesn't mean that it's good for an adult either. That's just the law. Now, don't drop off here because I think you're going to learn something here, and it's more than just the lead paint issue. Because I want to put this into perspective on how this came about. So, the health issue was popping up all across the country, all over the place. But it's important to understand that it was happening all over the country. Only in states where houses weren't painted as much were the levels lower. In fact, where I lived for a long time in New Mexico, the levels are low because that state's housing stock didn't have a lot of painted houses. The population was also very small comparatively to the rest of the United States. But let's get back to what happened. So, this was happening all over, and it was a bad public health situation, and public health officials were alarmed. They had congressional hearings on this topic. It's a big thing to have a congressional hearing. There's something going on underneath it when you hear that people are going to Congress and having a hearing on this. Then there were directives to study the issues. Then there was policy written, and it went from the House to the Senate and back and forth to the scientists. So think about this. The United States government was going through a huge public policy process to examine this health issue. And they developed these working committees, they consulted doctors and scientists, and then all these forces came together to ban a substance in products that we use in our home. That's a big deal. So when you ask about this, watch your transactional professional. You will learn a lot about them. You will learn if you can trust them because the truth is that they're helping you through the process. And the more transactions they make, the more money they make. And if they talk too much about this, well, they also don't want to be liable, but they also don't want to blow the deal. Better yet, many of our states, when buying a home, is buyer beware. So, really, what they're saying to you is you need to do all this research. And guess when this disclosure is presented to you? You guessed it, right when you decide to make an offer on a house. And in my opinion, that's too late. That's an afterthought. The dangers of lead and ingesting it are real. Navigating the dangers of lead paint hazards is just one tiny little piece of the puzzle. Here at the firsttimehomebuyer.workshop.com, our entire mission is to transform you from the stressed out buyer lost in the chaos into a savvy first time home buyer who can proudly say, I got this. Because at the end of the day, if you're buying a home for yourself, you don't want to get sick. And if you have a family, their safety comes first. And it's heartbreaking that we can get so caught up in the process and sort of forget about this issue. When I was a bureau chief in a state housing office, I read an article about an architect in Philadelphia, and he was renovating a turn of the century home. It sounded like a lot of fun. There was lots of woodwork, and the wood had been painted, and they wanted to restore it to its grandeur. And they decided to get rid of the lead paint and bring the wood look back. Well, he had little kids, and sure enough, they all tested high for lead level. Just so you know, too, it used to be a standard that you have to have your kids tested for lead before they enter kindergarten. So the point is that even the professionals that are in the business, and this architect, for sure, he knew about it, but his life was busy with 4 kids. He's not a bad person. He probably just forgot or didn't realize. This is why I want you to learn about these health issues before you say the words, we're going to buy a house, because life moves forwards, and sometimes, well, we're human and we make mistakes or we forget. And with lead, this is so important for your health to make sure that we keep you safe. As a side note, lead has not been banned by our society either. Every year there is a list put out, usually at the holiday time, with a list of all the toys that are unsafe, tiny little parts or toys that have lead in them. Be sure to check that list regularly. And I say that because one time I had a client whose little boy he was about 10. Well, he tested high for lead levels. And I knew it wasn't from the apartment where they were living because of the age of the apartment. But guess where it came from? Yes, a toy from another country. So it can happen anywhere. Now, much of our housing stock was built after the war, and the houses were built and painted in the 1950s and 60s. Fast forward to 1978, and lead paint was banned, but it was already in the house. So what do you do if it's already there? Well, there's 3 things you need to do. First, you need to educate yourself about the dangers of lead paint. Number 2, you need to test for it. And number 3, know there are several ways to remediate the situation. Most likely, it's going to be by encapsulating the paint, which is just a fancy way of saying paint over it. But also, you have to make sure that you maintain it. And now, how this is going to affect you as a first-time home buyer is that needs to be part of your house maintenance budget. And that directly ties into affordability. Encapsulating is the way painters remediate the situation, and it is also recommended by the EPA. For testing, there are 2 ways to do it. First is to test with a lead inspector, and the second is to test with a test kit sold at many hardware stores. When you have a lead inspector test the home, they will be looking at all the painted surfaces 36 inches and below, and all the movable parts such as windows and window sashes and window jambs that could create lead dust when operating. The machine that will be used will test the surface of the paint and go all the way through to the wood. However, it cannot tell you exactly which paint layer has the lead. The good news is at the end of the test, you will know if there is lead, and you will also have a detailed report as to the location of the toxin in the home. The surface tests that are sold at hardware stores, this is where you rub a solution on the surface of the paint to see if there's a reaction, and it will tell you by color what indicates if there is lead or not. Many states maintain a master list of properties that have had and are positively tested for lead. Now, that's usually just the ones that have been reported. The only way you know is to have the paint tested at the home that you're thinking of purchasing. One time I had some buyers and the seller was not so great. He was a lawyer and he knew about the lead paint roster at the state, and he didn't want us to test during the home inspection because if we backed out and the house tested positively for lead, there was a smaller buyer pool. So that can happen too when you're in the middle of the transaction and sort of the tensions are high, or your excitement is high, or your nervousness is high. Well, we went ahead and tested anyway. One, because it was our right to do so, but also we also did a surface test as well. So here's the loophole. This is a disclosure. And a disclosure is that you will receive disclosing if there are quote unquote known lead paint issues. So, what do you think every attorney would advise you to do? Is that you need to say that you don't know unless you have the official reports of the property or official tests, or the property is listed on a government site. So, the bottom line is if the seller doesn't know or did not do the test, there's nothing to disclose. This information just alerts you to this information. So you can see when you're buying your first home, this is going to tie back to your values that we touch on at the first time homebuyer workshop, because you will then decide if you want to live in a home or deal with a problem or a home that might have lead paint. Finally, I've lived myself in many houses where there was the potential for lead paint, and I've had friends where they have had a house full of kids living in a house with lead paint, and none have tested high for lead. The key is knowing how to remediate it. But they also don't play in the soil near the house structure, and they don't typically move the windows up and down and have their hands on the windowsills. So it is possible to safely live in a house with the potential of having lead paint, especially if you love the character of the old homes. I hope this information has helped you, and know there is so much more to buying a home. Here at the First Time Homebuyer Workshop, our community is waiting to meet you so that you can say, I got this. Visit us at our website to start your transformation today. Bye for now.